the NBA returns this month. And with it comes the return of the athletes with more social capital than in any other sport in the world. NBA players have tremendous cultural power, and they exert it, as we saw when they immersed themselves in the so-called social justice movement over the past year or two. This activism has been celebrated as player empowerment by a media desperate to prove its woke credentials on subjects like racial justice. They love it. Journalists castigate those who point out that this divisive messaging by players and coaches on issues like BLM and defunding the police is making half the country dislike these players, not to mention hurting the ratings. But the journalists say, shut up, shut up. We deny it and don't talk about it. But it's true. It's been very divisive, and it's really cost the NBA in terms of its ratings. The nonstop lecturing can turn off even casual fans who just want to watch a basketball game and not get lectured to on social mores by a bunch of guys whose league has not exactly been a leader when it comes to obeying the law, treating women respectfully. I could go on. No matter, NBA stars speaking their minds when it comes to George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, and cops. The media loves it. Love it. But it turns out that player empowerment is kind of annoying when it comes to COVID and mandatory vaccines. Yes, a secret exception to the preach rule of reacting when players speak out on social issues. Who knew this was in there? No, you see, when it comes to athletes who don't support mandatory vaccines or who don't even want to get the vaccine themselves, the horror. These woke media scolds are much more in the Laura Ingraham shut up and dribble camp. Who knew? You see, in 2021, the only socially acceptable COVID vaccine position is every good person must do as Dr. Fauci, instructs and get one, and then tell others to get one too. There is a serious lack of vaccine rationalists in the corporate media, whose official position is you either believe everyone must get a vaccine or you're a dangerous anti-vaxxer. No middle ground, no nuance, and no one is allowed to care about anyone's particular medical history. Irrelevant. But the reality of these vaccines is, of course, it's a bit more complicated than the media admits. Shocking, I know. And I say this as somebody who supports vaccines, who is vaccinated, and I love the vaccine. I think it's a miracle. I think we should be very proud that we came up with the Pfizer and the Moderna and the J&J vaccines so quickly in record time. We should be touting it, not afraid of it. All right. But I don't support the mandates. And I loathe the dishonest media scolds who deem you a bad person for not wanting the vaccine while they're out partying in bars all night, allegedly rubbing their hands on their genitals and then shoving them all over strangers' faces. Hi, Don Lemon. Hi, looking at you. And now the COVID vaccine zealots have turned their sights on the very NBA players whose voices they had deemed so important back when they were bashing cops. Is it because murder rates are now at record highs in America's major cities? No. It's because many of these guys, as it turns out, are not super pro-vaccine. Or perhaps they're just not pro-vaccine mandates. The horror again. And they've had the nerve to say it out loud. Now, I don't know much about basketball, but I do have a working knowledge of who some of the superstars are. And some of the biggest names in the sport are in this vocal minority. You saw LeBron James this week say he got the vaccine, but he wasn't going to tell others what to do. You got Kyrie Irving and Bradley Beal. And then there's Jonathan Isaac of the Orlando Magic. Did you hear him this week? He gave probably the best response I have seen yet from any public figure on his thought process behind whether to get the vaccine. A rational, cogent response to a question about why so far he has chosen to remain unvaccinated. Listen.
I've had COVID in the past, and so our understanding of antibodies, of natural immunity has changed a great deal from the onset of the pandemic and is still evolving. I understand that the vaccine would help if you catch COVID, and you'll be able to have less symptoms from contracting it. But with me having COVID in the past and having antibodies, with my current age group and physical fitness level, it's not necessarily a fear of mine. Taking the vaccine, like I said, it would decrease my chances of having a severe reaction, but it does open me up to the, albeit rare chance, but the possibility of having an adverse reaction to the vaccine itself. I don't believe that being unvaccinated means infected, or being vaccinated means uninfected. You can still catch COVID with or without having the vaccine. It should just be their decision. And, loving your neighbors, not just loving those that agree with you or look like you or move in the same way that you do. It's loving those who don't.
That was amazing. Wasn't that perfect? Obviously, Isaac makes perfect sense. Perfect sense. He's had COVID, for God's sake, right? We've heard this from nurses who are about to get fired and school teachers who are about to get fired who have had COVID and don't want to have the vaccine forced on them. But this logical point of view is not allowed. Rolling Stone, the once respectable magazine, published a piece headlined, "The NBA's anti-vaxxers are trying to push around the league, and it's working." He's not an anti-vaxxer. Not wanting to get the vaccine once you've had COVID does not make you an anti-vaxxer. Isaac, who already drew the media's ire a couple of seasons ago for being one of the few players to refuse to take a knee in support of Black Lives Matter, his first sin, is described as, quote, deeply religious and proudly unvaccinated, more sins, and is said to have come to his vaccine decision after, quote, studying Black history and, wait for it, watching Donald Trump's press conferences. His worst sin of all. That was it. That's when he lost the media. But Isaac maintains he's not anti-vax.
I'm not anti-vax. I'm not anti-medicine. I'm not anti-science. I didn't come to my current vaccination status by studying Black history or watching Donald Trump press conferences. I have nothing but the utmost respect for every healthcare worker and person in Orlando and all across the world that have worked tirelessly to keep us safe. My mom has worked in healthcare for a really long time. I thank God, I'm grateful that I live in a society where vaccines are possible and we can protect ourselves and have the means to protect ourselves in the first place. But with that being said, it is my belief that the vaccine status of every person should be their own choice and completely up to them without bullying, without being pressured, or without being forced into doing so.
So he didn't. He didn't, right? He came to his decision on his own. He did his own research, and that's not okay. And the response to players like Isaac, who are calmly, rationally, convincingly making their case, is it shut up and listen to them? As we were told when a Black man spoke during the Black Lives Matter protest back in 2020, no, they no longer want us to listen. Will Leach of New York Magazine has the perfect response. Players who aren't vaccinated explaining their decision shows, quote, the downside of player empowerment. Again, shut up and drivel, guys. Shut up and drivel, says Will. Chris Cillizza of CNN writes that, unfortunately, several elite NBA players used their return to camp to voice their deeply uninformed views on the COVID-19 vaccination. Did Isaac seem deeply uninformed to you? Did he? Did he seem off the reservation? Chris Cillizza's translation? You're a bunch of dumbasses. That's what he thinks. Signed, Chris Cillizza. Can't wait for the articles, by the way, about how Cillizza is bullying these players. Cillizza is the same guy who tore into Donald Trump for challenging Dr. Fauci's narrative that COVID-19 began in nature, absolutely in nature, and definitely not in a lab in Wuhan, China. Cillizza at the time chastised then-President Trump, writing, quote, only one of these two people is a world-renowned infectious disease expert, and it's not Donald Trump. Of course, the former heads of the FDA and the CDC both now say the lab leak theory is the most likely explanation for the origins of COVID-19, Chris. And a majority of Democrats and Republicans also now believe that. No thanks to uncurious lemmings in the press like you. But it is not just Cillizza who's upset with players like Isaac. Scott Van Pelt of ESPN delivered a viral rant against these players on his show this week. Listen.
When you're a star athlete who avoids answering with some vague explanation about doing more research, it's a bit disingenuous. What type of research? Where? Is this something that you read or heard somewhere? Are you researching smallpox vaccines, polio, flu shots, any of that? Truth is, you're probably not going to explain to anyone why you're choosing not to do this. And again, that is their right. Kevin Durant called Kyrie Irving's decision personal. But when personal decisions impact a player's ability to be available to their employer in a relationship which makes both of them a whole lot of money, well, what happens next? I don't know. I also don't know why athletes who have trusted doctors their entire careers to care for ailments suddenly distrust them on this specific issue. If there were internet threads about how having your ACL repaired with a ligament from a cadaver would turn you into a mutant, maybe they'd be hesitant to do that too. I don't know.
Not for nothing, but the condescension dripping from Van Pelt and Leach and Saliza is coming from three white guys, essentially describing NBA players who all happen to be black as a bunch of ignorant dopes. So what are we really seeing here? What's really going on? It's more evidence of how dishonest these media hacks are, and the collapse of their vacuous claim that they are for player empowerment, support NBA players finding their voice, and want them to voice their unvarnished opinions. Sure, the media loves that when the opinions are, quote, the correct ones. The vaccine issue isn't going anywhere. It's going to be front and center this season in the NBA and elsewhere. And while the goal of these media outlets is, theoretically, to get more people vaccinated, shaming and bullying those who make a different choice and pretending they don't have perfectly reasonable reasons for those choices, like already having had COVID, is the absolute worst way to persuade anyone to listen to them. But then it's not about persuasion. It's about control. The vaccine zealots, just like the CRT zealots, fear they're losing it. They're losing control when guys like Isaac speak out. And they are. And they should. And we can continue wresting control from media hacks who loathe anyone who disagrees with them by continuing to speak out to your school board, your employer, your local paper, your neighbors on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and elsewhere while we still can.